You're Adam Christensen running for Congress in Florida's 3rd district.
Last time I checked, yeah.
So you were born in Olathe, Kansas, actually. That's where Zach and I are from. We grew up in Overland Park in Kansas, and we were surprised to
Really?
see that you came from the same area.
Well, I don't really remember it because
Yeah,
I
you were
think I
just
moved when I was 3. But
okay.
yeah,
Gotcha. That's funny. So yeah, what brought you to Florida, and where are you living today?
I'm in Gainesville right now, which is basically where the University of Florida is. Dead center, landlocked, hour and a half from the beaches on both sides. I came down here to start my first company. Really, is why I came down. So I drove across the country from Virginia Beach to Indiana to Tampa to California to North Dakota, then back down, and basically tried to find the best place to start a company, and landed here.
Okay, cool.
You're running.
Oh,
Oh, go ahead.
I was
Sorry,
going to
Yoho.
ask you what that company was and what experience you got in that starting a business.
I mean, it's basically it's an analytical testing lab. It does testing like on essential oils and natural products to make sure that they're real. Basically, a company they got screwed. They bought like 60 grand worth of oil and it was all fake, and they didn't realize it was fake. And so it didn't want that to happen again. So they had to pull like $60,000 worth of it off the shelves.
Interesting.
Yeah, you're running for Congress in Florida's 3rd district. Could you tell us about some of the unique problems that are facing your district and how you're able to address them in the way that your Democratic primary opponents, Philip Dodds and Tom Wells, aren't?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I mean, the biggest things, when I decided to run was number one, because of my companies and just talking to the other like small business owners, like we were trying to provide benefits, but it's a startup. And so, money is tight. And at the same time, like nobody in the startup world is really able to provide benefits, especially if you're like self-funding a company. And so we really needed healthcare. And I turned 26, got kicked off my parents' healthcare, just like, everybody else. And that's the highest rate of people uninsured. And I was just like, I looked around and I started talking to other people too, because it was like 8 to 10 grand per employee. And I basically went and talked to a bunch of other companies. And I was like, can you afford this? Like, are you able to offer things? Like, what are you doing? What are the best plans? That kind of thing. And they all were in the exact same boat where it was just they couldn't afford it. And they couldn't recruit really good people to come work for them because nobody's going to leave a crappy job where you have okay insurance and jump to a startup or a small company because, if your kid goes bankrupt, if your kid gets sick, you go bankrupt. And so it's one of those things where it's just like, they didn't have the option. And so a lot of small companies are just getting killed right now because they can't hire the best people. And so that's a huge thing I know that is affecting, especially the community here. But I really I saw that Ted Yoho was going to retire. And I thought, I'm going to go help whoever it is that's going to run against him. And, whoever's going to win, that's who I'm going to go help because, it's like the first chance that we've had in 15 to 20 years to be able to flip the district. And the more I looked and the more I looked at both people that were running and I just didn't see anyone who, number one, was talking about the things that needed to be talked about and like were affecting like the people I knew. And then at the same time, even if they did have like good policy positions, they were not able to effectively communicate it, especially with people around here. And so I was complaining about that with some friends and they basically looked at me and said, you don't really get to complain unless you're going to do something about it. And my response was, well, I don't know what I could do about that. And then basically, looked at what it would take to get on the ballot, went out with the puppy, got a little Pomeranian husky and just started talking to people, trying to get petitions and stuff because you had to get like 5,000, which is a ridiculous number. I think New York is like 1,000 or something maybe. And like to get on the ballot to pay is 10 grand in Florida when in like New York or something, it's like one. And some places it's like $400. And so like, it was one of those things where I started talking to as many people as I could just to see, if like Medicare for all, like a Green New Deal, a federal jobs guarantee, universal childcare, if these were things that, number one, I knew worked policy wise and like were cheaper than everything else. But at the same time, like people would actually want. And like just going out to talking to people, because like when you start a new company, you have an idea and then you need to like test it. You need to create a demo and you need to test it, make sure it's a viable product. People are going to want it. And so really got to that stage and realized I need help. I need way more people. And, within the first week of putting something out at University of Florida, we had 10 people jump on and say, we haven't found any other way that we could positively affect change here and be able to like move the needle on these things that you're talking about that we care about. And we think this might be the best way we can do that. And so we're at 33 people now. We got our primary coming up in August. They're all under the age of 26. It's one of those things where we realize we have to organize. Like, we have to build infrastructure and structures that North Central Florida just doesn't have. And we have to do it as quickly as possible. And not only that, but to be able to flip Florida and turn it blue, you have to start at the House district level. Because right now, Florida's House districts are just getting killed every year. And one of the reasons is the Democratic Party does not run a person in every single district. I mean, let's be honest. Like, to be able to win, you can't have other people in other districts like double team you with money and double team you with support and volunteers. Like, you have to have a broad base of attack. And so there was only going to be one or two people. We have like 5 or 6 House districts in our congressional district. And there was only going to be 1 or 2 that were going to be contested. And there was a group that said, yeah, no, because like if those House districts do well and they turn out the vote, the congressional district does well. And if the congressional district does well, then the presidential does well. And so it's one of those things where we are trying to, it's not just, about what we're doing here. It's about what we can do on a much larger scale here that has just never been done.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that you speak especially about healthcare being tied to employment, and especially from the perspective of a business owner yourself. And I think that one big piece in the proposition of these programs like universal childcare, Medicare for all, issues that you've championed, is kind of the framing on those issues. And that's something you've talked about, and something that I appreciate in your campaigning is you've kind of referred to these programs as middle-class tax cuts, which they would effectively end up being for a lot of people. Can you tell us a little bit about the thought you put into messaging and how you believe that we can get people to come around to certain issues like Medicare for all that they may have a preconceived notion of them being too radical or too expensive?
Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of like you guys, I grew up in a red county, very, very red county. And basically what I realized very early on, especially in those places, is just that marketing and framing and the way that people approach things with their words matters a lot. Because I learned that too from my 2 companies, is that you may not have the best product. You may have something that's completely fake. But if you can market it, if you can frame it in a way that makes people want it, it will sell. So some of the best sellers in the essential oil market are completely fraudulent. About 60% of the stuff sold in that market are completely fraudulent. But some of the biggest sellers in the world, they market it so well that people are willing to pay 10x what they should be for a fraudulent oil. And so for me, looking at the way that I grew up, I realized that, especially a lot of policies that people pushed when I was younger, they don't work and they haven't worked, but they've been able to frame it in a way that makes people feel like they have a piece of whatever it is. And so they feel like, oh, well, it's personal responsibility, or, oh, I want the government out of my hands because they're taking my money, kind of a thing. And what I realized was that allows private companies to come in and essentially become middlemen and prey on those people, because the services that should be taken over and taken care of by the local government or the state government and be much cheaper are not. And so the way that we have to frame these things is, at the end of the day, if you are paying less, it is a tax cut. And the reason is you're paying taxes to private companies, you're paying taxes to the government. And right now,
I was just going to say, I think that's a perfect segue into another point that you've raised, which is that 1/3 of U.S. adults don't have access to broadband internet.
Yeah.
Speaking of gaps where the government should be stepping in, and people are falling through the cracks of the private companies. Could you talk about how you view internet as a public utility?
Right now, almost all the industries that we have in the United States are run by, I call them corporate cartels, essentially monopolies, or 1 to 2 companies that essentially have complete control over those industries. And internet is one of those. Like here, I think we only have access to maybe 1 cable provider total. And the rural counties, you have access to, if one. And that's it. You don't have competition. You don't have a free market. You don't have anything that would make essentially a conservative, or like if conservatives say that they want a free market, we don't have that with internet, and we don't have that with cable. And right now, if we need to, as we've seen in a pandemic, if internet is as important as water and electricity and everything else, it's for education, it's for business, it's for, I mean, doing this over the internet right now, you literally could not do this without affordable or accessible internet, and tons of people just don't have that. And right now, especially in a pandemic, for poorer neighborhoods and poorer people, they cannot learn. They cannot go to school. Why? Because everything is over the internet. And so if we don't have access to that, if we don't treat it like water, if we don't treat it like it is necessary to live in the 21st century, then I think we're then we're losing. We're just not doing it correctly. And so access to the internet for everyone as a public utility has to happen.
I think that's one of the things that having more younger people run for Congress is it's such a no-brainer. You know, the internet is so essential to everybody, you know, of our age group and demographic that, you know, we've grown up with it. It seems so essential to, whereas somebody who maybe grew up in a generations prior, it seems like more of a luxury. They don't understand how essential it is to the, you know, fundamental day-to-day for all working people. One of the other elements of your internet policy that I wanted to talk to you about would be your position on net neutrality, which is one of the issues I feel like has kind of fallen through the cracks that doesn't get discussed about in a way that it should. Could you talk about your position on that?
Well, you know, it's the same way I talk about broadband. I mean, essentially you have internet company, or not internet company, but you have cable companies that can pretty much decide what information people can get to, how quickly they can get to it. They can essentially extort companies like Netflix or other streaming services to pay whatever rates they want simply because they can choose to slow down their internet. And so for people across the country right now, whether or not you have access to internet, whether or not you're going to be paying the amount you should be paying, it all has to come down to net neutrality. And right now, we have to protect the internet as a public utility. And if you let private companies essentially monetize whatever they want to or whatever they can, they will. And there are some things I feel like have to be a public good. And right now, internet is one of them. And if you don't, sorry?
I was just going to ask, follow up, would you agree that certain social media platforms, maybe Twitter, Facebook, that they also should be regulated as public utilities to kind of uphold the
I wouldn't say that they need to be regulated as public utilities. What I would say is they definitely need to be broken up. They are monopolies. I mean, you have Facebook, which anytime, and as we've seen, every single time that a new social media comes out, as soon as it gets popular, what happens? It gets bought for a ton of money and consolidated into one companies. I mean, you have like Instagram, Vine, all of these other different social medias. They're either here or they're not anymore, based on one or two companies' opinion of them and whether or not they can buy them or they can destroy them. And right now, no company should ever have that power. And if you actually have a free market, they wouldn't. And so things like Facebook, it needs to be broken up. It's 4 or 6 different companies all wrapped up into one with a market cap bigger than anything we've ever seen. And we can't have that. When we had Standard Steel and Standard Oil and those things in the 1990s or like the 1890s, like we realized they were killing our economy. And they were making it so that our elections were getting swayed in ways they shouldn't have been. I mean, that's what Facebook is doing now. We have to approach it the same way.
Yeah,
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, agreed. To pivot a little bit into what's going on right now in the streets of America, and as well as back into the messaging front. You've been an outspoken critic of the policing in this country and police brutality we've seen recently, but you've also recently warned that leftists should maybe stay away from using language like defund the police and maybe instead use language like a community first approach to policing. Basically, the argument is that the defund the police phrase is not as effective politically and would get bogged down in the semantic argument too much. How do you propose that we rethink policing in America?
So for me, there is a difference between how you would approach activism versus how you would approach running in, say, a red district.
Right.
For me, right now, politicians that are running in red districts, you're running on things that you should never water down. You're running on things like a federal jobs guarantee. You're running on things like Medicare for all. You're running on things that will change people's lives and you can inspire them. But, and here's the key but, What Democrats and progressives have been really bad at for years is framing and marketing. Like I said earlier, you can have a crappy product, but if you market it well, people will buy it and it will become very popular. Right now, we have to take things that are wildly popular and make it feel like the correct thing for a lot of people that think, oh, well, that would be radical. Well, no, it's not radical. It's very moderate. It's very easy. And so for me, when it comes to framing, especially for things like policing, we have to do a very good job at that to bring along people that we never thought would come. And I think that has to do a lot with the way that especially people that are running for positions frame the things that they say. A lot of politicians just do very bad marketing. With activism, defund the police, scream it in the streets. I think it's fantastic. Like, I am someone who has been on the receiving end of police brutality. Like, I have been thrown up against a chain link fence. I've had my face smashed in the ground, threatened to be tased, all because I was coaching a soccer game and somebody said that my assistant coach and I were trespassing. And the first people to come out were police officers, and they escalated the situation. And so, like, I have spent a night in a private prison on a misunderstanding, and I understand what that looks like. And so for me, I am the biggest advocate of making sure that we get rid of, like, qualified immunity. I was not able to sue the police officer because he had immunity, essentially legal immunity. And going against the state or the county and the park at that point is just too difficult, and there's too many loopholes for them to get away with. And so we have to reform policing in our country. Activists need to be as bold and as visionary as they possibly can. But when it comes to changing swing voters and when it comes to changing people that are more conservative, we have to change our tactics when dealing with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Assuming that you were to make it into office and you're on Capitol Hill, what would be your approach to working with the more establishment Democrats who might be reluctant to kind of accept a lot of the more radical policies? We've seen a lot of backlash from the Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer types against insurgent campaigns. And in a lot of times we see more of a warming up to the established maintenance of the insurgency. What should voters expect from you on Capitol Hill?
Well, for me, right now we have to worry about winning our district. And so for us, there's a lot of things that I believe fully with my heart that, I can't run on here. Doesn't mean it goes away. It just means it's not the focus of our campaign. And so for me, there are a lot of things, that I would, with a position of power, I don't think that anybody who has a position of power should be afraid of losing an election. I think that if you get to a position of power, you have to stand on courage, you have to stand on your morals, and you have to do what you think is correct and what is right. And so for me, number one, I would never consider Medicare for all to be radical. I would consider it to be a middle ground solution between socialized medicine and what we have now. And you have to frame it like that. With things like universal childcare, I say, look, this is not radical. Other countries already do this, and they have an ROI of 1.25 on every dollar that they spend. And so they're making money on it. Like, all the things we're running on are not radical. Reforming the police department, right now we spend, 10 to 20x what we spend on any other health service on just policing. And you don't want somebody showing up to deal with an issue with somebody who's homeless with a police officer with a gun. You want somebody who actually knows what they're doing, with homeless services. We don't want somebody showing up to somebody who's having a mental breakdown with a gun because we've seen that they get shot. It's one of those things where we need to change our priorities and we need to shift the way that we think about things. And if that means giving more money to other services, which I think we should, and taking it away from people who clearly have not been trained in de-escalation to the point they should be, I think that that's just something that we have to do. And I don't think any of these things are radical. I wouldn't run on them if I thought they were radical, because I can't run on them because of where we are. I mean, it's one of those things.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these ideas that they try and get, pitted as radical, they seem sort of common sense to most people. Has that been the reaction that you've gotten from the kind of standard working class people that you've spoken to while campaigning? And
yes. The problem is when we talk to people, they have it in their heads, this kind of idea of what the word means because they've seen it from someone who has made it into something that it's not. That's my biggest issue with defund the police, is that it makes it a lot harder for someone like me to say, no, these are great policies. And so I have to get past verbiage that other people use or have an idea of what it means to be able to get to what matters. And so my thing when I said that on Twitter is basically, for someone like me, like if you say something like a community first approach to policing, you don't have to worry about semantics. Nobody freaks out on you, and then you can actually have a conversation about it, as opposed to trying to get over the hurdle that's brought up just by saying a phrase, if that makes sense. So you asked earlier about more centrist Democrats and more corporate Democrats. Well, right now everyone almost in Congress is a corporate Democrat. And the ones that aren't, I mean, they're having a hard time being able to do anything. I mean, you have blocks on the Republican side, like the Freedom Caucus. They went into Congress and they said, we don't have a ton of power, but we have enough people that believe in this thing, and we can stick together and we can cause havoc in our own party. And I really think that Democrats would benefit from having places that are safe districts, safe Democratic districts, that no one will ever lose in, a Democrat at least, and getting the most left or radical person you can in those positions. Why? Because they can be that way. In places like ours, you don't water down your policies. You never water down your policies, but you reframe them. And you make them in a way that is palpable to independents, non-party affiliated, and conservatives. And if you frame it differently, you don't change anything policy-wise. If you frame it differently, you do much better.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of a strategy that Brent Welder actually talked to us about, who ran for Kansas's 3rd Congressional District here and came short but close in his run. He said that actually he would consider, if running again, to maybe kind of run right in the primary and left in the general, kind of assuaging the fears of some of the more establishment Democrats that are worried about that, radical policy. And then in the general, really putting forefront the economic agenda, talking about these common sense issues that would improve people's lives, because that's exactly what they are. They are common sense. And we're glad that you're, bringing those issues up in the conversation in Florida. And is there anywhere people can go to hear more about your platform, your district, and maybe where to support you?
Yeah, absolutely. Our Twitter page is pretty active. It's AC for Congress 2020. Our website has pretty much our whole policy platform up there, pretty detailed, a lot of information. We have an entire policy team that does papers every single week on different issues. We have all of the different social medias as well. One of the big things right now is just being able to fundraise, is just being able to bring on the money to do what we need to do. Because for us to effectively market and get these ideas out there, especially to the rural areas of the district, it's expensive. And so for people like me and the people on our team, we're not taking money from this campaign. We are putting every dollar we can back into it in order to do the most that we possibly can. So our overhead is very low, but everything that we're bringing in, we are trying to make effectively put into communication. And so that's really the biggest thing right now, is doing everything we can to increase the amount of voters that are voting here. And at the same time, making it so the policies that other people have said are radical for a very long time become mainstream and almost conservative in the way that we frame them, the way they're talked about. Because, you could give me any topic and I could pull from a conservative mindset something that they care about deeply and be able to spin it in a way that they will agree with. So for instance, Medicare for all. Everyone hates paying more than they should. Right now, you hate being preyed upon. You hate middlemen. You hate people taking your money and running off of it when you shouldn't have to. And that's what insurance companies are doing. That is what those middlemen are doing. They do nothing for you. They give you nothing. And yet they are stealing your money every single year. And you should have better health care. It should be cheaper, but people are taking it from you. And when you say something like that to someone, especially as you guys know, they do not like that. They get extremely upset, and everyone should be upset. We have to make it and frame it in a way that lets people understand that, look, you're being taken advantage of, and it's bigger than just, it's immigrants, or, it's refugees, or, it's somebody your class or a lower class or somebody poorer than you. The reason that you don't have a good paying job and you're working at Walmart is not because of somebody else taking a different job and taking your money. It's because Walmart came in. They killed off all the other small businesses and family-owned businesses that were there for 40 years. And those jobs that paid 60 grand are now cut to 24. Why? Because they have no competition. And when you frame it like that, almost as like a free market perspective, it's a game changer, I think. And we found it to be a game changer. And I think that progressives especially have to run on the original Teddy Roosevelt progressive Republican platform when it comes to economics. And if you run on that, I mean, you can run with the most left policies and you will easily bring over a lot of conservative and independent-minded people.
Adam Christensen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, I really appreciate it, guys.
Thanks. Have a good one, man.
Yeah, thanks so
you
much
too.
for talking to us.